More than any other technical design or social institution, the railway stands for modernity. No competing form of transport, no subsequent technological innovation, no other industry has wrought or facilitated change on the scale that has been brought about by the invention and adoption of the railway. Try to think of a world before the railway and the meaning of distance and the impediment it imposed. Think of the limits placed on economic activity and human life chances by the impossibility of moving food, goods and people in large numbers or at any speed in excess of 10 miles per hour. Of the enduringly local nature of all knowledge, whether cultural, social or political, and the consequences of such compartmentalization. Of all the technological advances of the 19th century, few captured the imagination like the railway locomotive. These steam-powered puffing devils heralded a new era of transportation, where people could travel quickly and comfortably to previously unimagined destinations, and goods could be delivered in much greater quantities for increased profit. Writer John Ruskin observed the rapid pace of change taking place in his native Britain. Along the iron veins that traverse the frame of our country beat and flow the fiery pulses of its exertion, hotter and faster every hour. But not everyone was enamoured with the train's grip on the 19th century imagination. That devilish iron horse, whose ear-rending neigh is heard throughout the town, has muddied the boiling spring with his foot, and he it is that has browsed off all the woods on Walden shore, that Trojan horse, with 1,000 men in his belly, introduced by mercenary Greeks. Where is the country's champion, the Moor of Moor Hall, to meet him at the deep cut and thrust an avenging lance between the ribs of the bloated pest? Demanded naturalist Henry Thoreau. Nevertheless, the locomotive was here to stay, and rail lines sprawled across continents. In 1830, there was only about 75 miles of railroad track in the United States. Within 10 years, that figure had exploded to almost 2,800 miles. With names like John Bull, Old Ironsides, and General Haupt, locomotives chugged across the American continent, opening the West, encouraging migration, and showing people a world beyond their town or city. At first, America imported British engines, but the nation soon established its own thriving locomotive industry. By 1880, it was producing more than 1,000 trains a year. Developed as a prototype in 1830, Tom Thumb was the first American-built steam locomotive used on a common carrier railroad. Its vertical boiler included boiler tubes made from rifle barrels. In 1914, around the same time the Trans-Siberian was finished, Californians celebrated the opening of the Northwestern Pacific Railroad. The line was a joint venture between Southern Pacific Railroad and Santa Fe Railroad, so the companies could share in the lucrative revenues flowing from a connection to the redwood lumber mills around Humboldt Bay. Construction workers laid sleepers through some of the most rugged Pacific Northwest countryside, blasting tunnels through mountain ranges and building railway bridges over foaming gorges. A huge crowd gathered to welcome the first train passing through the towns of Willits, Cane Rock, Arcata, and Eureka in October 1914. But the railway had already suffered early problems, with a large section of track washed away in a flood before the official opening. And after the celebrations, a number of dignitaries were stranded when a landslide blocked the line to Eureka. But for the townsfolk celebrating their new railway line, the Northwestern Pacific meant jobs, connection to civilization, and the prospect of a bright future. The railroad was christened with California wine wrapped in an American flag. It was a moment of patriotic pride and great optimism. The dignitaries included federal and state politicians, as well as representatives of the Northwestern Pacific Railroad, and the moment was captured on film to be preserved for posterity. The same year, the Redwood Empire Special was christened at a special ceremony in Sacramento. Popular California Governor Sonny Jim Rolfe engineered the start. The governor was a wealthy businessman who was adored by Californians for his down-to-earth manner and reputation for getting the job done. On the railways, the job was getting giant steam trains onto the tracks. Trains that could transport huge shipments of lumber. The Redwood Empire Special hauled 117 cars bearing 3 million feet of California redwood to be delivered to 21 states. Giant Southern Pacific engines haul 9.175-ton cargo over the Sierra, the longest and heaviest train ever taken over the hill in one block. Colonial powers consolidated their control by building railway lines that could transport soldiers and guns across continents. Germany stretched a rail link from Berlin to Baghdad, a politically explosive project that benefited the Ottoman Empire at the expense of the British and French. The British in turn set up railway companies in India and Africa to link the far-flung regions of its empire into rail networks. The most remote and exotic parts of the globe became accessible. Journalist Edward Arnold said in 1865, "Railways may do for India what dynasties have never done. They may make India a nation." Lahore railway station was a symbol of this optimism. Costing 500,000 rupees to build, its foundation stone was laid in 1859, and it still stands today. Built in the years immediately following the Indian Mutiny, the structure was designed to function as both railway station and a fort. Russia, another great empire, also linked its principalities to a railway system. In 1891, it began construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway, a major arterial line designed to connect feeder lines across the Caucasus and Central Asia. The project cost almost 1.5 billion rubles, and workers at both ends started construction at the same time, working in tandem towards the middle. The Shinkansen, a sleek, futuristic speeding bullet that symbolizes the Japanese love of modernity and efficiency.
It runs on rail lengths a mile long, on which it has reached 150 miles an hour on a trial run. Even then, it wasn't flat out. On regular runs between Tokyo and Osaka, nearly 500 miles, the bullet will keep the speed needle steady at 190 kilometers, about 120 miles an hour. Even with 5 stops, it cuts the journey time to 4 hours. With their sense of timing, the Japs will have a small fleet of these 1,000-passenger trains when all the world's in Tokyo for the Olympic Games.
Shinji Sogo, president of Japan National Railways, which operates the trains, was present for a speed trial in the 1960s that saw the Shinkansen reach a record-breaking 256 kilometers an hour. The diesel engine streamliner passed all its tests with flying colours. The Bullet was the first standard gauge train built in Japan. It was developed as a response to the pressures modern life had brought to Japan. a burgeoning population that was concentrated in the big cities and relatively close distances. Another great achievement, this train is called maglev, which stands for magnetic levitation, a wheelless vehicle on a magnetic track driven by electrical linear motors. This method has the potential to be faster and quieter than most conventional trains, potentially reaching speeds comparable to turboprop and jet aircraft. Maglev is cheap to run and maintain, having almost no moving parts to go wrong. Powerful magnets underneath each car keep it balanced and floating above the rail. The powerful electromagnets fitted under the maglev car are fully computerized. Automatic electronic control maintains a constant air gap between magnet and rail, compensating all the time for variations in passenger loading. At speeds of up to 430 kilometers per hour, the test ride traveled the 30-kilometer stretch to the Shanghai district Pudong in just 8 minutes.
Just amazing. Nothing prepares you for it. And immediately you think, if you ran one of these from London past Birmingham and Manchester and then up to Scotland, you could get up from London to Glasgow or Edinburgh in, I suppose, something like an hour and a quarter, an hour and 20 minutes. It's about the only thing that would actually get people out of domestic flights.
Discover the past with exclusive history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians, all from History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to explore everything, from the wonders of ancient Pompeii and the mystery of the princes in the tower to the life of Anne Boleyn and D-Day. Sign up via the link in the description.
On August the 8th, 1963, Britain's most famous robbery took place on the Royal Mail train, the Glasgow to London travelling post office. The operation to steal millions of pounds in used, unmarked bills was planned with precision and carried out with unparalleled daring. The thieves targeted the second carriage from the front, where valuables, mostly cash, were stored. Usually the train only carried about £300,000, but because it had been a bank holiday weekend in Scotland, the coffers had swelled to about £2.3 million. The overnight train left Glasgow on Wednesday night. At 3 the next morning, driver Jack Mills had just passed Leighton Buzzard when he saw a red light signalling him to stop at Sears Crossing. The train came to a halt. What Mills didn't realise was that the signal had been rigged by stuffing a glove over the green light and attaching a 6-volt battery to the red. Co-driver David Whitby got out of the train to see what the problem was. He discovered the railway communications cable had been cut. But before he could get back into the train, he was attacked, handcuffed and thrown down the embankment. In view of the robbery, British Railways rulebook was later amended to prohibit drivers from leaving the cab when they encountered a red light. Meanwhile, one of the robbers entered the cabin and knocked Jack Mills unconscious. Although no one was seriously hurt, the experience shook the victims badly. It didn't take long for police to track down the thieves' hideout, and the gang was soon on the run. In 1964, 13 men were sent to jail for a total of 307 years for carrying out Britain's notorious Great Train robbery. But just 4 months later, Charlie Wilson broke out in an escape as daring as the robbery itself. A gang of men on the outside stole a builder's ladder to scale the walls of the mental hospital that lay next to the prison and freed Wilson and 3 other prisoners from their cells using a master key. A huge manhunt was launched to find the fugitives, but it took police 3 years to track Wilson down to his hiding place in Canada. Great Train robber Ronnie Biggs was similarly disinclined to serve out his sentence and plotted an escape that was to prove more successful than Wilson's. He escaped to Paris, Australia, and then to Brazil. Biggs forged a new life in Rio, becoming a tourist attraction for Britons. In 1999, he invited more than 100 people to celebrate his 70th birthday in style. But Biggs's health was fading fast after a series of strokes, and in 2001 he returned to Britain where he was sent back to jail to serve the remainder of his sentence. As well as luxury and romance, train travel has led to some tragic accidents. In 1943, there was devastation when a train derailed in Nuremberg, Germany. Railways were at capacity during war operations, leading to a number of fatal accidents.
7 persons were injured when a passenger train plowed into a derailed locomotive near Lancaster, Pennsylvania during a blinding snowstorm. The crash occurred before tracks could be cleared following an earlier derailment. Winter adds its hazards to America's war-burdened railroads.
The following year, disaster struck Britain's railways near Durham.
Another post-war disaster strikes Britain's railways. The fast London-Newcastle Express crashed into a freight train with a cost of 10 lives and many injured. Sleeping coaches are splintered and piled 20 feet high. The death toll was considered miraculously low, considering that the crowded train carried 400 passengers. The wreck was the third to be visited on British railways within a 7-day period. Soldiers join wrecking crews in probing the tangled wreckage. England's fine safety record suffers a grievous blow.
Frogmen were sent into a freezing lake to search for crash victims following a train derailment in Sweden in 1958. The train left the track about 100 yards from Hultafors station and plunged into a nearby lake. For 48 hours in sub-zero conditions, the frogmen checked and double-checked the wrecked train for crash victims, but found nothing. The final casualty list stood at 20 passengers injured, an amazingly small figure in view of the damage sustained by the Gothenburg-Borås Express. Swedish railway officials concluded that the accident was caused by a fault in the lines, possibly due to the intense cold prevalent at the time. The same year, a mountain train plunged into a valley in West Germany. The train started its downward journey from the 1,053-foot-high station towards the Rhine. Suddenly, one coach lurched and plunged from the track, smashing its way down the mountainside. Flowers hurled from the train as it gathered speed on its death plunge, showed how the day started. The body stretched out under the trees told how it ended. In 1966, commuters got a fright when 2 carriages of Chicago's overhead railway system left the rails and plunged 10 meters onto the street below. 1 man was killed and at least 25 people were injured. The accident occurred during a rainstorm as the elevated train traveled above Indiana Avenue. It slipped off the rain-slicked tracks and crashed down on the street below. The accident stopped the morning rush hour traffic on the line, and tens of thousands of commuters were trapped in trains elsewhere along the route. The grand dame of indulgent rail travel is the famous Orient Express. At its peak, steaming across pre-war Europe, the original Orient Express inspired more thrillers than any other train in the world. From Graham Greene to Agatha Christie, novelists told of its legendary high living and low deeds. It was the Orient that made the train so famous in the realms of fact and fiction. It ran across Europe from Paris to the Balkans and Turkey. But the Express was the setting for stories of intrigue, adventure, and mystery. The fascination was that the films and novels owed something to real events. Bodies occasionally did fall from carriages, and each station promised romance for strangers who met on the train. As train travel declined in Europe during the post-war years, Orient Express services were dropped. Sadly, the train stopped running to Paris. Air travel and delays and restrictions at some East European frontiers were given as reasons for the Express ending. The first Orient Express pioneered the idea of crossing Europe by rail, and eating and sleeping in comfort. The original Orient Express made its inaugural journey on October 4, 1883, transporting about 40 very important persons in style from Paris to Romania. The first 6 years were adventurous. Passengers had to navigate perilous open catwalks between cars. In the 1890s, travellers got off the Orient Express at a tiny Danube town and took ferry boats across the river into Bulgaria. From there, a train took them to the Black Sea port, where another boat took them to Constantinople. But by 1889, Paris and Constantinople were connected, and it took 67 hours 35 minutes to make the transcontinental journey. Soon other versions of the Orient Express came into being, but none captured the imagination like the original. The heyday of the Orient Express was at the turn of the century. Later, during the 1920s, tales of murder, mystery and espionage grew around it. An extension to the railway line was started in 1906 with the building of the Simplon Tunnel, which enabled the train to travel as far as Milan, Venice and Trieste. From Italy, it would then steam as far as Istanbul. In 1982, the Venice Simplon Orient Express was revamped to run twice weekly from Calais to Venice. The Pullman cars were refurbished and restored to original condition. In 1988, the service set a world record for the longest train journey ever made. The express travelled from France to Hong Kong non-stop. But despite its popularity and mystique, many countries dropped the Orient Express from their schedules. However, the far-seeing Swiss cashed in by running a commemorative Orient Express from Zurich using original carriages. Platform entertainment reinforced the period atmosphere. This specially run train, which King Boris himself used to drive across his Balkan kingdom, preserves all the old comforts, from the splendour of the sleeping berths to the pride of the service, the luxurious dining cars. Here, long ago, is where the crown heads mixed with captains of industry and secret agents dallied with femme fatales. On this trip, anyone can be anyone. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievements. The development of the automobile built upon the transport revolution started by railways. And like the railways, introduced sweeping changes in employment patterns, social interactions, infrastructure and goods distribution. The automobile is one of those inventions that can be credited to many different inventors. The first horseless carriages, as these vehicles were known in the 18th and 19th century, were propelled by steam, the high-tech propulsion method of its day. Over the course of the 20th century, the automobile rapidly developed from an expensive toy for the rich into the de facto standard for passenger transport in most developed countries. Rich people rode, poor people walked. Horses, carriages, bicycles and cars. That's the way it was. Since the earliest days, motoring has never been exactly cheap. At first it was only the wealthy and the brave who could afford to dispense with their horse-drawn carriages and take up with the infernal combustion engine. But transport continued to be defined by money. The wealthy rode or flew, the poor walked or pedalled. Then Mr. Ford came along and revolutionized the world. He drove the first Ford car in 1896 and started building the iconic Model T in 1908. He doubled wages, gaining the expertise of the best mechanics. He invented the moving production line, and he forced down the cost of entry into motorcar ownership. The first Tin Lizzies cost $825, but 8 years later, the price was $360. By 1918, over half the cars in America were Model Ts, and when production stopped in 1927, over 15 million had been built, a record which stood for over 45 years.
The cars began coming off the assembly line at the rate of 1 every 40 seconds.
By 1932, Ford was manufacturing 1/3 of all the world's cars. One Boston motor car dealer was heard to suggest that the Model T was invented to keep poor people out of good cars. In reality, the Model T made motoring accessible to the masses and made the exotic machines of the wealthy attainable to anybody who worked hard, married well, or got lucky. Henry Ford was once quoted as saying that the Model T would be available in any colour you like, so long as it's black. Europe wasn't lagging behind America, although none of the car makers there managed to rival Ford's remarkable influence on mainstream American culture. Louis Renault was the youngest of 5 children in a wealthy French family. After his army service, he built a 4-wheeled small car equipped with one of his inventions, a 3-speed gearbox with reverse. The versatile car, the Renault Type A, made Louis Renault a manufacturer. When he won a bet with friends that it could drive up a steep street in Montmartre, he received 12 orders for the car. In 1905, Renault became a mass producer, with an order of 250 taxicabs. In 2 years, there were more than 1,500 Renault taxis on the streets of Paris, and more were exported to London, New York, and Buenos Aires. In contrast, Citroën came along much later, 1919, but founder André Citroën had previously made gears and hand grenades during World War I. He was greatly influenced by Henry Ford's production methods, and in 1934, Citroëns were among the first front-wheel drive cars.
The 1948
model was not much praised by the specialised press.
They said, "What kind of car is this? It's grey. It's really weird."
It's true that it was sort of a UFO in the car industry at the time.
It was at the Paris Motor Show in 1948 that Citroën first introduced their low-cost car. For almost half a century, the 2CV revolutionized the French car industry and became a major part of the country's culture and way of life. The first 2CV was created in 1939, right before the Second World War, but only made its public debut in Paris. It was the oddest car ever presented at the show. It had only one headlight, no starter motor, and very loose suspension, which made it jump on bumps. It looked more like a tin can than a car. The 2CV was very cheap and designed for the countryside. Originally, it was made to replace a farmer's horse and cart. This meant the car was solid, almost indestructible, and able to transport 4 people and a crate of eggs across a freshly ploughed field without breaking the eggs. Its cheapness and practicality appealed to low-income families who could finally afford to buy a car. So the public responded well, and very soon, 2 years after its introduction, there was a waiting list of 2 years to get one. Altogether, more than 5 million 2CVs were produced. But in 1989, production stopped in France. 1 year later, in July 1990, the only remaining production line in Portugal also stopped. The British motor industry started when Frederick Sims bought the rights to his friend Gottlieb Daimler's engine in 1893 and founded the Daimler Motor Syndicate to build motorized boats. In 1895, Henry Lawson bought Sims' interest in the engine, realizing its potential for land use. Vehicle development in the UK was hard because 19th century laws, known as the Red Flag Act, restricted the use of mechanically propelled vehicles on the public road. A man with a red flag had to walk ahead and warn people, especially those with horses, that a motorized carriage was coming, effectively limiting the car's speed to a walk and therefore much slower than a horse-drawn carriage. In 1895, as one of many attempts to promote his schemes, Lawson and Frederick Sims founded the Motor Car Club of Britain. He and the club organised the first London to Brighton Emancipation Run in November 1896 to celebrate the relaxation of the Red Flag Act, marking the start of a motor industry in Britain. Early British vehicles relied on developments from Germany and France, but by 1900, the first all-British four-wheel car was designed and built by the Wolseley Sheep Shearing Company, later the Wolseley Motor Company in Birmingham. Herbert Austin had lived and worked in Australia for 9 years, transferring back to the UK with the company. He remained on the board until 1933. In 1905, Austin resigned from the Wolseley Tool and Motor Company, taking some of the senior staff with him, and in 3 years, Austin was producing 17 different models. By 1913, Henry Ford had built a new factory in Manchester and was the leading UK producer, building over 7,000 cars that year. Roads quickly overflowed and the dream of effortless personal transport dissolved into a reality we still have today, the traffic jam. Car production just about stopped during World War I, as industry geared up for the war effort, employing women in large numbers for the first time. Austin's company focused on the war effort, and in 1917 he was knighted and also received the Belgian Order of the Crown of Leopold II for employing 3,000 Belgian refugees at his factory. The car business was difficult after World War I. Austin was close to bankruptcy in 1921, and a receiver was appointed. The baby Austin was launched in 1922 and offered for sale at £225, putting it within reach of customers who had never previously owned a car. Its output reached 25,000 annually by 1925. The price was reduced each year. In 1922, there were 183 motor companies in the UK, yet by 1929, following the slump years, there were only 58. In 1929, the big names were Morris, founded by William Morris in 1910, and Austin. Between them, they built 60% of the cars in Britain. In 1932, Britain passed France as Europe's largest car producer, a position it held until 1955. In 1937, the UK produced nearly 500,000 vehicles, but the Great Depression of the 1930s virtually halved demand for vehicles, and thousands of jobs were lost. Modelled on the vast factories built by Ford and General Motors in Detroit, the British car makers had huge workforces. At least the British had exports to former colonies in the Commonwealth to prop up production. Even the mighty Bentley, so beloved of wealthy playboys and aristocratic amateur racers, couldn't weather the storm. Despite winning the iconic Le Mans 24-hour race, Bentley was sold to the even more elegant Rolls-Royce company. For years, a Bentley was just a slightly cheaper version of a Rolls-Royce. But at least the badge survived. Many did not. Over in Germany, where the very first car was built by Carl Benz in 1885, another people's car was to rise from the ashes of the Second World War, the Volkswagen. Unkindly called the Beetle because of its shape, the name stuck, and the rear-engine car became an icon for a generation. It was designed by an engineer whose next project would make his name revered by enthusiasts around the world, Dr. Ferdinand Porsche. His sports cars would dominate racing and define luxury high-performance driving for decades. During the 1960s and early 1970s, Volkswagen advertising campaigns and a reputation for reliability and sturdiness helped Beetle sales figures to rocket up. In 1972, production passed the level of the previous record holder, the Ford Model T, and by 1992, over 21 million Beetles had been produced. Beetles were built in Ireland, Thailand, Indonesia, South Africa, Australia and Nigeria, as well as huge numbers in Mexico and Brazil. In 1962, a slightly modified Beetle set a new record for driving around Australia. The Beetle is popular with customers throughout the world, not only because it's cheap and easy to work on, but because the body can be personalised or even removed entirely to make sun-loving beach buggies and off-road races. A whole generation, thousands of racing drivers started their quest to reach Formula One in single-seated Formula V races using Beetle engines, wheels, brakes and suspension. Another German manufacturer that was resurrected from the ruins of World War II was NSU, who built motorcycles and scooters and made the natural progression to small lightweight cars. The Prince was built in large numbers between 1957 and 1973. The early cars were noisy and slow, but improvements were made throughout the Prince's 16-year life cycle. In the earliest days, roads were places that horses hauled carts. But as more and more cars came along, so did road construction gangs, roadworks, road closures, and chaos on the roads. From packed earth to hand-laid wooden blocks, cobblestones to concrete, and eventually poured and rolled hot mix, a byproduct of making petrol, roads became more durable. Vehicle makers rose to the challenge and soon realised that driving all the wheels was the most efficient way of moving their machines. The first four-wheel drive was made in Amsterdam in 1903, but some car drivers wanted to go further than the roads permitted, and in weather that would defeat most cars, so owners had their vehicles fitted with skis and moving link tracks like chains that became common on military and earth-moving machines. One of the first four-wheel drive systems was designed for a steam engine, before cars were even invented. But the robust all-wheel drive truck built by Marmon Harrington was quickly adapted to military use. Explorers and commercial interests saw improved all-terrain vehicles as the way to conquer vast and inhospitable areas like the Sahara Desert. Caravans of camels would soon be sharing the desert with convoys of wheeled vehicles. Though the camels would sometimes be needed to free vehicles trapped by the shifting sands. If necessity is the mother of invention, then warfare is its father. All it takes for technology to make huge leaps is a war. And the world of automobiles is no different. The Second World War spawned what is now known as the Jeep. Although no one's really certain what the name came from an abbreviation of general purpose to an internal Ford naming system in early 1941, Willys proved the vehicle's off-road capability by having it driven up the steps of the United States Capitol by a test driver who heard soldiers calling it a Jeep. Small, rugged, cheap, and seemingly indestructible, it prompted dozens of imitators and variations from just about every manufacturer. Even once the war was over, vehicle development continued, with trucks being made to carry more load over rougher ground and at higher speeds. The British Army even experimented with a gas turbine-powered armoured vehicle and weren't shy about demonstrating what their fighting machines could do. So too the Americans, keen to find out just how far these rugged, all-terrain runabouts could be pushed, and all in the complete absence of any kind of driver protection or safety equipment. And after the war, when there were lots of surplus jeeps left at the end of hostilities, keen drivers did what comes naturally. They raced them. This is probably the only time in motorsport where a dog is allowed to be carried as a passenger, and where you are encouraged to soak your rivals. Even with humans aboard, the result is the same, as drivers tackle tough terrain in their rugged little ex-army surplus vehicles. Modern developments have seen the switch from combustion to electric engines. One concept is the Twizy, which boasts a flowery exterior and a futuristic cockpit, full wheel covers, pearlescent white paint, and luminous matrix displays that act as headlights and taillights, and can create smileys to tell other drivers what you think of them. An urban vehicle for city dwellers, the Twizy, 2.3 metres long and 1.13 metres wide, and carries 2 people in tandem. Power comes from a small 15 kilowatt electric motor connected to lithium-ion batteries under the seats, giving the 420 kilogram Twizy the performance of a 125cc motorbike with a range of 100 kilometres and a top speed of 75 kilometres an hour. There are no doors, but the whole body of the Twizy acts as a safety cell, and there are side airbags. The Zoe ZE concept targets motorists who own more than one car and who are looking for a compact electric vehicle capable of meeting day-to-day needs, such as the school or work run. Like most concept cars, Zoe has some odd touches. A L'Oreal button injects soothing particles into the cabin to hydrate the 4 occupants' skin, and its interior can change colour. Zoe is 4.1 metres long, rides on 21-inch wheels, and is powered by a 70 kilowatt electric motor. In Renault's view of the electric car world, the driver has 3 options when it comes to filling up on energy. A standard charge takes between 4 and 8 hours via a charging socket on the outside of the vehicle. A quick charge in 20 minutes using the same socket at specific charging points or their exclusive quick drop system. 3 minutes at a rapid battery exchange station. Renault has put 4 electric concept cars on the menu in recent years, vehicles it intends to bring to full production by 2012. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievements.